They tried to kick my guests off the lake, and they thought they could get away with it. But they didn't know the truth about this land, my land. It was the 4th of July, and the air smelled like smoke and summer freedom. Burgers hissed on the grill, the pop of firecrackers echoed faintly across the cove, and for once life felt simple. Kids laughed near the dock. My buddy Nate, an ex-Marine with the calm of a man who's seen worse than most of us can imagine, flipped burgers like it was a mission. Old Evan, my grandpa's surveyor friend, sat back in a folding chair, telling some story about sinking knee-deep in a swamp back in the 70s. That lake, the trees, the worn wooden planks of the dock under our feet, it wasn't just property to me. It was my inheritance. My grandfather left it behind, along with a warning I'd never forgotten. People will always try to take what's beautiful, not out of need, out of greed. I thought about that as the sunlight bounced off the water like a sheet of glass. Perfect, too perfect, the kind of perfect that never lasts. That's when I saw her. Karen Lawson, president of the Lakeview Meadows HOA, marching down the narrow trail from their manicured greenbelt into my yard, clipboard in hand, chin high, that look on her face that said she wasn't coming over to borrow sugar. She didn't greet me, didn't even look at my friends, just jabbed her pen at my table like she was calling a foul in a game no one else was playing. "Caleb," she snapped, "we need to talk about your boundary." I sipped my water slow, calm. My grandpa taught me never get mad first. It gives away your weakness. "Karen," I said evenly, "happy 4th. Nothing to talk about. Boundaries right where it's always been, 80 years. She tapped that pen against her clipboard, sharp and steady like a woodpecker on metal. "You're mistaken. The shoreline has shifted. High water levels, erosion. The boundary line has moved inland. This section," she swept her arm like a queen staking her claim, "is now HOA common area, as of today." I swear the sound of kids' laughter just died. One mom pulled her child closer. A little kayak bumped the dock. My guests looked frozen, waiting for my response. Karen lifted her clipboard like it was a badge. Compliance check commencing. Nate set down the tongs. Metal clinked against the grill. Evan stopped mid-story. Even his drink hung in the air, forgotten. "Don't touch my guests," I told her. My voice was steady, but my stomach was steel. She stepped farther into my yard, her heel grinding into the grass. "Names, addresses, you're trespassing." Nate moved one step forward, his voice calm but cutting. "Step back to the trail." Karen smirked, "Or what?" And that's when I spoke the words that froze her in her tracks. The words I knew I'd need to back up with more than just confidence. "This is my private land." Silence, the kind of silence where even the birds seem to hold their breath. I explained it: water law, surveys, decades of proof. I knew the difference between accretion and avulsion. I knew that the line doesn't just move because the water rises. Evan backed me up, his voice carrying the weight of years in the field. She was mixing up river law with lakeside plats. Rookie mistake, or maybe deliberate. Karen's smile tightened into a grim line. She hated being contradicted. "We'll see what the board's lawyers have to say. Consider this a friendly warning, Caleb. You're encroaching." And with that, she spun around and marched back toward the trail, her back stiff as a steel rod. We stood there in silence, listening to the hiss of the grill. "Friendly warning," Nate muttered. "That's as friendly as a rattlesnake buzzing before it strikes." He wasn't wrong. Because deep down I knew that was only her opening move, and the next one wouldn't just be words. The next morning, the lake felt different. Fog hung low over the water, a pale veil that made the world too quiet. I stuck to my routine: black coffee, boots laced, a walk down the trail to check the dock. My grandpa always said the lake talks to you if you're willing to listen. That morning, it wasn't whispering peace, it was warning me. The first clue lay on the trail. At first, it looked like a shimmer in the dirt. But when I crouched down, my gut clenched. Roofing nails, dozens of them, laid out sharp side up, hidden just enough under pine needles to slice a bare foot. A dog's paw or mine. Not an accident, a message. I didn't shout, didn't curse. My heart slowed to a steady thrum. I pulled out my magnetic sweeper, the kind mechanics use to find dropped screws. For 20 long minutes, I crawled through the dirt, collecting more than 50 nails. Each one clicked against the magnet like a bitter little note in a song of malice. I dropped them into a plastic bag, evidence. Gloves on, phone filming, timestamp rolling. Because in fights like this, proof matters more than rage. But the trail wasn't the worst of it. When I reached the dock, the smell hit me. Sharp, chemical, acrid, bleach. Someone had poured it across the wood, stripping the stain, leaving pale streaks that gleamed wet under the morning light. The boards were slick, dangerous. If one of my kids had run barefoot out there, I swallowed the thought before it could finish. The bleach had dripped into the water, leaving a milky cloud around the pilings. My dock wasn't just vandalized, my lake was poisoned. My grandfather's lake. And just when I thought I'd seen the full extent of it, a faint buzz rose overhead. A drone. It drifted above the cove, camera gimbal tilting, the red blink of its eye fixed on me. It hovered, traced the dock, then pivoted toward my posted sign, no trespassing, no drones over property line. I raised my phone, filming it as it jerked, climbed, and zipped back toward the HOA path. Not a hobbyist, not some kid. This was surveillance, intimidation, proof that Karen's warning wasn't just words, it was war. I didn't waste time. I called Dana Ruiz. Dana is our county game warden. Sharp eyes, sharper temper when it comes to the lake. She's the kind of officer who treats pollution like a personal insult. I laid it out for her. The nails, the bleach, Karen's claims from yesterday. She was silent for a moment, and when she finally spoke, her voice was steel. "I'll be there in 20 minutes. Don't touch anything else." I hung up and kept looking, and that's when I saw it. 10 feet from the water line, hammered into the soil, stood a piece of rebar. 18 inches long, capped with a shiny orange plastic top. It looked official, too official. My stomach turned cold. I'd walked that line with my grandfather 100 times. I knew the true markers, the buried axle at the oak tree, the granite stone across the cove. Old, weathered, solid. This pin, it was clean, shiny. Fresh hammer marks still glinted on the metal. The cap had no surveyor's license number, no company stamp, just plastic from a hardware store. It was a fake. Not just intimidation now. Fraud. Manufactured evidence to back Karen's land grab fantasy. Dana pulled up as I was taking pictures, my boots crunching on the gravel. She stepped out, her face tight, scanned the dock, the nails, then crouched by the fake pin, her jaw clenched. "Freshly driven," she said. "No oxidation, soil's too loose, amateur work. You'll need a licensed surveyor to document this." "I already know who I need," I told her. "Evan Pike. The same man who once sat in my yard with a drink in hand, telling swamp stories. My grandfather's old surveyor. A man whose seal could tear Karen's lies apart in court." The bleach, the nails, the drone, they were noise. Ugly, dangerous noise. But this pin, this was the centerpiece of their scheme. Their big mistake. Because now I had proof. And proof, once gathered, doesn't just defend, it attacks. They thought they were clever, that by planting a shiny piece of rebar in my soil, they could redraw history. But the thing about fraud is, it always leaves fingerprints. Evan Pike came back, not as a guest this time, but as the seasoned surveyor he'd always been. His old truck rattled up my drive, tools in the bed, license in his vest. The man looked like a farmer, gray beard, worn jacket, but in court, his seal carried more weight than a dozen lawyers. He didn't speak much at first, just walked slow, circling the fake pin like a wolf sniffing a trap. He crouched, ran a calloused thumb over the soil. Loose. Wrong, tapped the cap, plastic, no license number, no company name, just hardware junk. "Amateur," he muttered, shaking his head. "Put in last night. This isn't a marker, it's a scarecrow. They're trying to build a story, Caleb, and a bad one at that." His disgust said more than any speech could. Inside, I pulled out the old survey map my grandpa had framed decades ago. Thick black lines traced the curve of the cove. Anchors, the axle by the oak, the granite post across the water. "These," Evan said, stabbing the paper with his finger, "are your monuments. The beginning and end of the law, everything else is noise." Noise or not, Karen's plan was clear. Plant a fake marker. Hire someone to string a line across my yard. Paint the trees, then smile at the board and call it community property. fraud wrapped in HOA letterhead. Dana Ruiz had finished with her water samples, her face set like stone. Between the bleach, the nails, and this pin, I can already write half a report. But to really bring this down, you'll need to catch them using it. Tie Karen to the fraud directly. She wasn't wrong. Evidence proves the scheme, but catching the hand in the act, that nails it shut. Nate leaned against the porch rail, arms crossed, listening to all of us. When I finally fell silent, he spoke just 3 words. So we watch. It wasn't a question. Evan nodded slowly. They'll come back, you're right, they have to use it. Mark trees, stretch a string line, that's the next move. And when they do... Dana cut in, raising an eyebrow. You call 911, I can't sit in the bushes with you. But if a crime happens near the lake, I might be nearby. Her meaning was clear. And just like that, the plan was set. That night, Nate and I crawled into a thicket of rhododendron near the fake pin. He had a thermal monocular. I wore night vision goggles. 2 shadows among shadows, watching and waiting. Evan sat in my house, monitoring the trail cameras I'd strapped to trees earlier, ready to radio us if anything moved. The night was slow, the kind of slow that eats at a man. Every twig snap feels louder. Every hour stretches. I thought of my grandpa then, of how he'd hate this, not the defense of our land, but the pettiness of the fight. He believed in straight deals, firm handshakes. But Karen didn't play fair. And sometimes, when someone drags you into the dark, you have to fight in the dark. Hours passed, stars wheeled overhead. The lake lapped against the dock. Then, at 2 a.m., Evan's whisper crackled in my ear. Got movement, 1 person, community trail, moving slow. I lifted the goggles. The world turned green. At first, nothing, then movement. A figure stepping through the trees, dark clothes, moving clumsy, snapping twigs, not a pro, not careful enough. Nate's breath was steady. I see him, he murmured, carrying a bag. The man came closer, stepping into the clearing near the pin. Broad shoulders, thick-set build. He pulled out a flashlight, kept the beam low. Then I recognized him. Rob Hale, HOA handyman, Karen's fixer. He crouched by the fake pin, pulled tools from his bag. Yellow string, orange spray paint, a framing hammer. My gut tightened. He wasn't just here to look. He was here to make it real. He tied the string to the pin, unspooled it toward my dock. Fraud in neon yellow. A fake boundary meant to steal half my yard. Anger flared hot in my chest, but Nate's hand tapped my arm. Wait, let him commit. Rob reached the edge of my lawn, string taut from pin to dock. He lifted the hammer, ready to drive a nail into my post. That's when we moved. We didn't run, we walked, 2 shadows stepping out of nowhere. Enough, Rob, I said, voice low but sharp. He spun, panic flashing in his eyes. Karen said, quick in, quick out, just string and paint. Then why the hammer? I asked. He froze, looked toward the woods. No rescue came. His breath grew ragged, and then he made the wrong choice. He lunged, swinging that hammer in a wide, desperate arc. It lasted 3 seconds. Nate slid inside the swing, deflected the arm, twisted his wrist. The hammer clattered to the boards. Rob's arm locked behind his back. Controlled, pinned, fight gone before it ever started. I dialed 911. Calm, precise. This is Caleb Morgan, Lakeside Drive. I have a trespasser. He's secured. The weapon is on the ground. Sirens came fast. Deputies cuffed Rob, logged the hammer, string, paint, evidence. Every piece another nail in Karen's coffin. As they drove him away, the yellow string still trailed across my lawn, a pathetic monument to greed. But now I had more than proof. I had their man. And soon I'd have their leader. The morning after Rob was hauled off, the lake wore a heavy fog, like the world itself was holding its breath. But I'd spent enough time reacting. It was time to move. Time to drag this whole scheme into the daylight where it couldn't hide. I called Evan Pike. Bring your gear, all of it, and call the sheriff's office. We need a deputy to witness. He didn't ask questions. He just said, on my way. By 10 o'clock, the fog had burned off. My yard became a stage. Evan set up his transit tripod with the care of a surgeon laying out tools. Deputy Miller stood by with a notepad, no nonsense, making it official. Dana Ruiz came too, leaning against her Green County truck, arms folded, watching like the lake itself had sent her. Nate stood beside me, silent, steady, a quiet wall at my back. Evan started with the truth. He swept his locator until it screamed over the old oak tree's soil. He knelt, scraped away leaves, and there it was, the iron axle my grandpa's surveyor buried in 1946. Rusted, solid, unmoved by storms or lies. "Perfect," Evan muttered. He mounted his transit precisely over that axle, sighted across the cove, and guided me to the granite post on the far bank. The other anchor. The other truth. Two monuments set decades apart telling the same story. Then came the demonstration. Evan lifted his voice so everyone, and I hoped, the neighbors lingering just out of sight, could hear. "Let's run the true boundary according to the recorded plat." Nate carried the survey rod while I followed, pushing stakes with pink flagging tape every 10 feet. Slowly, a dotted pink line curved gently across my property, 30 feet behind my picnic table, cutting no one off from anything. It ended right at the granite post. The truth written in bright pink. But Evan wasn't finished. He moved his transit to the fake pin that shiny fraud hammered into my soil. "Now," he said, his voice hardening, "let's see what their line looks like." I tied the yellow string Rob had used and walked it toward the dock. The difference was like night and day. The yellow fraud line cut straight across my lawn, through the fire pit, within 5 feet of my porch, ending at the dock. Half my yard stolen with a piece of rebar and a lie. Dana took photos. Deputy Miller scribbled fast, his jaw tight. Neighbors watching from the trail gasped audibly. You didn't need a law degree to see it. One line was fact, the other was theft. Evan pulled the official plat map from his case, held it up next to the scene. Pink matched the plat exactly. Yellow matched nothing but greed. He tapped the fake line with his finger. "This," he said, his voice carrying, "is not a boundary dispute. This is a crime scene." That phrase hung in the air like a gavel strike. We packed up the equipment, but my resolve only grew sharper. Karen had bullied people with her title long enough. To stop her, I couldn't just file quietly and let lawyers haggle for years. I had to strip away her power in front of the very people she lorded over. So I made the call. The next HOA board meeting was in 2 days. I requested to be added to the agenda. Polite, professional, vague. An important matter of community property. They said yes, not realizing what was coming. The timing couldn't have been better. That same afternoon, a nervous man from down the street knocked on my door. He kept looking over his shoulder as if Karen herself might burst out of the trees. "I'm on the architectural committee," he whispered. "I heard about Hale's arrest. Karen, she's been running this boundary project for months. She thinks no one's paying attention." He slid a plain envelope onto my kitchen table and left without another word. Inside were emails, printouts between Karen and Rob. Subject line, boundary project. Plans, instructions, invoices, every rotten detail spelled out in black and white. I sat there at the table, the papers spread out in front of me, and felt a slow, cold certainty settle in my chest. Karen thought she'd written her victory in steel pins and yellow string. But she'd just written her own confession. The night of the board meeting, the community clubhouse smelled of burnt coffee and power trips. Fluorescent lights hummed overhead, bouncing off beige walls that had heard too many self-important speeches. About 30 residents sat in folding chairs, most of them restless, half-bored, and unaware of the storm about to break. Karen Lawson sat at the head of the long table, shoulders square, chin high. She wore authority like a costume she thought couldn't be taken off. To her right and left, the board members shifted papers, eyes glazed. Karen tapped her pen once, twice, then cleared her throat. "Next," she said with a thin smile, "we have Mr. Caleb Morgan, who has some concerns about the community greenbelt." Her tone made it sound like I'd come to complain about trash pickup. I walked to the front, set my laptop on the table, and hooked up the small projector I'd carried in under my arm. The screen flickered to life. My hands didn't shake. My voice didn't waver. "I'm not here to talk about concerns," I began. "I'm here to present facts." The room stilled. I started with the deed. The original 1946 survey plat, a simple map, lines drawn long before any HOA ever existed. This is where the line has always been, I said, unchanged for nearly 80 years. Then I showed the photo of the nails scattered along my trail. Murmurs rippled. A woman in the back gasped. I clicked to the next slide, my dark bleach streaks scarring the wood. More whispers. And then I put up the photo of the shiny rebar pin, bright, fake, planted in my soil. This, I said, letting the silence hang, was hammered into my yard last week. A fraudulent monument, an attempt to redraw my property. Karen's smirk faltered. These are baseless accusations, she snapped. The HOA has simply been exploring legal boundaries. I cut her off, my voice dropped steady cold. I'm not making accusations, I'm presenting evidence. I clicked play. The projector filled the wall with green, infrared footage. The room gasped. They saw Rob Hale creeping through the trees. They saw him tie the yellow string to the fake pin. They saw him step onto my dock, hammer raised. They saw Nate and me emerge from the shadows. They saw the swing, the scuffle, the hammer drop. A man in the back row stood up, his voice cracking with shock. That's my handyman. Karen, you told us he was marking trees for beetles. The whispers turned to voices, voices turned to anger. A woman near the door said, "We paid for this." Karen half rose, panic flashing in her eyes. She lunged toward the projector, fingers reaching for the HDMI cable. But Nate, seated by the wall, slid one boot forward, pinning the cord with a quiet scrape. He didn't even look at her. He just sat steady as stone. The footage kept rolling. When it ended, the room was dead silent. I froze the frame on Rob's face, hammer mid-swing. This is your HOA handyman, committing felony trespass, vandalism, and assault on my property. He is out on bail right now. Karen exploded. This is an outrage, this footage is private, inadmissible, he's a rogue employee. I looked her dead in the eye. It's my land, my cameras, logged into evidence with the sheriff's department, and it's not just footage. I clicked again. An email appeared on the screen. The subject line, Boundary Project. Karen's words printed in black and white. Rob, we need to establish a new marker. Place it 10 feet from the high water line. Per our discussion, we'll claim avulsion. Gasps rippled. I clicked to the next email. Then another. Purchase orders for rebar and caps. Instructions to spray paint. Invoices submitted for boundary rectification. Every single one tied to Karen's name. The board members' faces turned pale. The audience muttered, voices hardening. The HOA president wasn't just mistaken. She was orchestrating a criminal scheme. Karen's mouth opened, but no sound came. She stared at the wall as if the screen itself had betrayed her. I shut off the projector. The room plunged into silence. The sheriff has copies, I said. So does the county game warden, so does my attorney. This isn't a boundary dispute. This is a criminal investigation. And you, President Lawson, are at the center of it. I packed up my projector, nodded once at the stunned board, and walked out. My footsteps echoed against the tile floor. Behind me, the clubhouse erupted, voices raised, questions shouted, Karen scrambling to claw back a crown that had already slipped from her head. The showdown was over. But the fallout was just beginning. The morning after that meeting, the gears of the system began to turn. Deputy Miller called me just after sunrise, his voice clipped but steady. "We've got the warrant," he said. "The DA reviewed everything overnight. Judge signed it before breakfast. We move today." I didn't follow them to Karen Lawson's house. I didn't need to. I sat on my porch with a mug of coffee, the steam curling into the crisp air, and pictured it. The knock at her door, the deputy presenting the warrant. The look on Karen's face when uniformed officers stepped into the little kingdom she thought she owned. They didn't storm in with sirens or shouting. They didn't need to. Justice doesn't always come with a bang. Sometimes it comes with a clipboard, a signature, and a slow dismantling of power. They carried out her computer, her phone, folders of papers stamped HOA correspondence. Every keystroke, every email, every half-baked scheme, all boxed, tagged, and logged as evidence. From there, they rolled to Rob Hale's house. He was a handyman by trade, but a tool for Karen's plan. They found a partial box of the same roofing nails I'd collected off my trail. They found more of those cheap orange survey caps, identical to the one planted in my soil. The matches were perfect. The circle was closing. Dana Ruiz was there too, not for property law, but for something deeper. She walked the dock with me later that afternoon, holding her citation pad like a badge of honor. "We've got them on vandalism and fraud already," she said. "But with the bleach, I can hit the HOA for environmental violations. Conspiracy to pollute state waters. That sticks to the entire association, not just Karen." She wrote the citation right there, pressing hard enough that her pen almost cut the paper. The HOA itself named as responsible, and with Karen as president of record, her name was at the top. By evening, the neighborhood buzzed with rumors. News travels fast when it's bad. The HOA board scrambled, holding an emergency session. Word spread that they voted Karen out unanimously, every single one of them eager to distance themselves from her mess. They froze any funds for her legal defense. They canceled Rob Hale's so-called boundary rectification invoice. The hammer money, her 30 pieces of silver, would never be paid. That night, Nate came over. We sat on my dock with a couple of cold drinks. The bleach stains were still there, ugly streaks across the wood. He leaned back, took a long pull from his bottle, and said, "You did good, Caleb, real good." I didn't feel good, not triumphant, just steady, like a balance that had finally been corrected. The system had moved, slow, stubborn, but unstoppable once the proof was undeniable. Karen thought she could bend reality with a smirk and a clipboard. She thought she could bluff her way through property law and bully her neighbors into silence. But she underestimated something harder than her will, the truth, backed up with evidence. And the truth had just begun its march. The DA filed charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, felony trespass, vandalism. Rob caught an extra count for swinging that hammer. Dana's citations added weight, fines stacked on top of criminal exposure. I thought about Karen, alone in her house that night, staring at the walls that no longer felt like hers. The board had stripped her title. Her neighbors whispered her name with disgust. Her empire had collapsed in the span of 48 hours. But it wasn't over yet. Because soon the real test would come. Not in a boardroom, not in whispers, but in a courtroom under the gavel's strike, where every lie would meet daylight. And when that day came, she'd learn what it felt like to be on the other side of power. Court day came with none of the drama TV likes to show. No packed gallery, no shouting lawyers. Just polished wood, high ceilings, and the kind of quiet that makes you hear your own heartbeat. I wore a plain suit, nothing fancy. This wasn't about performance, it was about truth. Across the aisle, Karen Lawson sat stiff, eyes locked on the wall, like maybe if she didn't look at me, she could pretend I wasn't there. Rob Hale was beside her, smaller without his hammer, shrinking into his chair like a man who finally realized he'd been nothing more than a pawn. My lawyer, Maria Flores, was the opposite of Karen, sharp, precise, no wasted words. She didn't talk about feelings. She laid out bricks of proof, one by one, until the wall was undeniable. She started with the foundation, the original 1946 plat. "This line," she told the court, tracing with her finger, "has been fixed in record for nearly 80 years. It is immovable unless altered by legal process. No such process exists here." Then she introduced Evan Pike's survey, certified, sealed. His measurements matched the plat exactly, solid as bedrock. But Maria wasn't done. She rolled in the centerpiece a mounted aerial photo of my property. On it, 2 lines stretched across the image, one pink, one yellow. She pinned the pink first. "This, Your Honor, is the true boundary, confirmed by both record and survey." Then she pinned the yellow. It cut straight through my yard, across the fire pit, nearly through my porch. "And this," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "is the fabricated boundary created by Ms. Lawson's boundary project." The contrast hit like thunder. Even the bailiff leaned forward. Judge Carmichael, a no-nonsense woman with silver hair pulled tight, studied the board for a long moment. Then she peered over her glasses at Karen's lawyer, a man who already looked like he regretted taking the case. He tried anyway, mumbled about misunderstandings. claimed the emails were taken out of context. Suggested Rob was just an overzealous employee who acted alone. The judge's eyes narrowed. "Counselor," she said, her voice icy, "are you asking this court to believe your client just happened to send emails labeled Boundary Project, while her handyman coincidentally planted a fraudulent marker and trespassed with a hammer? Do you take this court for a fool?" The lawyer wilted, sat down. Maria didn't stop. She submitted the chain of evidence from the sheriff's department. Photos of the nails, the bleach, the fake pin. The lab report confirming chemical contamination. The hammer, the string, the spray paint, all tagged, logged, undeniable. And then we played the video. On the monitors, the courtroom watched Rob sneak through the woods, string the line, and swing the hammer. His face glowed green in the night vision. His panic was written plain. The judge didn't even glance at the screen. She stared at Rob instead. He lowered his head, shoulders caving in, as if the weight of the entire room was pressing down on him. When the video ended, the courtroom was silent. Judge Carmichael rubbed the bridge of her nose, then looked straight at Karen. "For a few feet of shoreline," she said slowly, "you orchestrated harassment, vandalism, fraud, and assault. You abused the trust of your neighbors. You exposed your association to massive liability." Her gavel came down like a hammer on steel. Summary judgment granted. The true line declared exactly where Evan's survey marked it. Karen Lawson and Rob Hale held jointly liable for damages. The survey costs, my legal fees, repairs to the dock and trail. The HOA itself found liable too, since Rob had acted as their agent. But the judge wasn't done. "Due to overwhelming evidence of deliberate fraud," she said, her voice echoing in the chamber, "this matter is referred to the district attorney for criminal prosecution to the fullest extent of the law." Gasps rippled through the courtroom. Karen's face drained pale. Rob just sat motionless, hands limp in his lap. The gavel struck again. It was over. Not just a win, a complete, devastating collapse of their scheme. Walking out of that courthouse into the bright afternoon, I didn't feel like a conqueror. I felt steady, whole, like a man who'd seen a wrong made right, not with shouting or fists, but with patience and proof. The truth had prevailed. But even then, one thing still lingered in my mind. How do you make sure no one ever tries this again? That answer came later. Word of the ruling spread faster than wildfire on a dry ridge. By sundown, everyone in Lakeview Meadows had heard. Some neighbors whispered in shock, others in relief, but no one defended Karen anymore. Her throne had crumbled, and all that remained was the echo of her own arrogance. A week later, county crews arrived to drive permanent granite markers into the soil. Heavy stone, chiseled with coordinates, set deep enough no storm or shovel could move them. I watched as they pounded the first one near the oak tree, the same spot where my grandfather's axle had been buried. The sound rang like a bell, a note of permanence, a promise that the truth was now carved in stone. The second marker went across the cove, replacing the weathered granite my grandfather's generation had trusted. The surveyors set their instruments, checked and checked again. Each strike of the mallet was steady, final, undeniable. Neighbors came out to watch. For years, they'd been silent under Karen's rule, afraid of fines and letters and her sharp tongue. Now they stood taller, freer. One woman clapped when the last marker was set. Another man muttered, "About time somebody put her in her place." Karen herself didn't show. Word was she'd resigned her position officially, though it didn't matter. The sheriff had already served her with charges: conspiracy to commit fraud, filing false documents, criminal mischief. Rob pled out quick, agreeing to testify in exchange for leniency. Karen, she lawyered up, but the evidence was a mountain she couldn't climb. The HOA board scrambled to repair their image. They sent letters promising a new era of transparency. They begged residents for patience. They even offered to reduce dues for a year, hoping to win back goodwill. But the stain remained. The association's name was tarnished, and everyone knew who was responsible. I didn't attend their meetings anymore. I didn't need to. My line was protected not just by law, but by stone, by truth, by the eyes of every neighbor who had seen the fraud exposed. One evening, weeks later, I stood on my dock as the sun dipped low, painting the water gold. Nate leaned on the rail beside me, his beer bottle catching the same light. "You notice," he said quietly, "how quiet it's been." I nodded. No drones, no nails, no bleach. Just loons calling across the cove and the gentle slap of water on wood. Peace, hard-earned peace. Evan stopped by too, carrying a rolled survey map under his arm. He unrolled it on my table, the pink line traced bold, the granite markers drawn in neat ink. "There," he said simply. "That's forever." I ran my hand along the line. It wasn't just property, it was history. My grandfather's voice echoed in my mind. People will always try to take what's beautiful, not out of need, out of greed. He was right, but what he didn't say was this. Sometimes the fight to keep what's yours isn't just about land. It's about dignity, about standing your ground when bullies come smiling with clipboards and threats, about proving that truth when defended still wins. As night settled in, I sat on the dock with the crickets chirping, the water still, the granite markers glinting faintly in the moonlight. Karen thought she could steal with paperwork and fear. She thought power was a title, a smirk, a threat. But in the end, her empire crumbled because it was built on lies. And lies always fall. Sometimes slowly, sometimes all at once. But always they fall. And when they do, the truth remains. Forever. You've heard this confession, now wait until you hear the next one. The truth that shatters everything you thought you knew.